Hey, Colton, I really appreciate you taking some time to talk to us today.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Thanks. Why don't you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and the role that you play at Zibtek?
Yeah, from Colton Sites, I am the director of client success. So basically what that means is I oversee all of our relationships with all of our clients, manage all of our ongoing projects. That means, bringing them on board, making sure that the project goes smoothly during the development phase, and then making sure that, if that project is going to come to an end, that the ending phase, the passover is all good. And then just maintaining that relationship going forward.
That's
So I'm,
awesome. It sounds like you are the man that people need to know. You've got it
yeah,
all.
in a way.
Um, so we talk a lot about this term agile at Zibtek. Can you explain maybe a little bit about what that agile methodology is kind of across the board and in general?
Yeah, so agile is kind of one of those broad terms that can kind of be, uh, you know, identified by, in different ways or used in different ways. But basically in development, the way that we use it personally, and then, I think as it's kind of identified in the development space is, it's a way of using a team to build products instead of, more like the waterfall method that you're used to in like more of a old school business structure where you have the boss who tells people what to do and then they go do it. The agile method's more of a process of people have roles and then they work as a team. So nobody's really anybody's boss on the team necessarily. It's more people bring in specialties and they play their role. So everyone has their own responsibilities and they come together to build a product. That's one big piece. And then the other big piece of it is the idea of, when you're building something like a building, let's say, right, you get your plans, you get your structure, and then pretty much you just go out there and build it. Like that's about it. There's not a lot of additional planning that goes on, right? It's all up front and then you build the project. With Agile, there's obviously a lot of planning up front where we identify what we're building, what we're doing, maybe make sure we have a timeline and all those general things. But the main point with Agile is that it's an ongoing planning and development piece where that allows us to pivot when necessary. The big thing with software is you could get 3 months into a project, technologies can change, your audience can change, your goals can change. So that lets us, maybe we were gonna build X, and then halfway through we can pivot to Y because we're meeting every day, we're planning every day, and we work in sprints. And then, to expand on sprints a little bit, that's a big piece that goes into Agile is it lets us plan in chunks and makes it easy for us, again, to do that pivot, right? We don't have some 6-month long plan that if you get 3 months into it, something changes and we're like, oh, we gotta wait till the end of the 6 months. We can't do that. So we do 2 weeks. That's pretty much our standard, the way we do it as for our planning. But again, you can do 1 week, you can do 3 weeks, 4 weeks. It kind of depends on the process and the person.
Awesome. So it sounds like Agile is something that really kind of brings that team together and makes you very nimble and helps you kind of like rotate and pivot and kind of stick with that. So what I've got a question about today, we're talking about this article that you guys have written about the heartbeat of Agile, and that's Agile User Stories. So give us an example of what you think a good Agile user story would be.
Yeah, so to expand on user story a little bit, the main point of a user story, why that's so important, is because what it's doing is it's identifying what we're building. It doesn't necessarily get into the details of how we're building it. That comes later. But the main point of the user story is to make sure that everyone identifies what it is, who it's for, and why we're building it. So a good example of a user story would be, let's say we're building a social media app, and a user story would be, you kind of follow the basic structure. You say, as a blank, I want to blank, so I can blank. So an example would be, as a user, so you're identifying the role that's for, I can send a friend request. And so you're saying what it is that we're doing. And then, so I can is explaining the why. So the why would be, I want to send a friend request so I can, expand my, my network. I can get new friends added who can then have access to my, my photos, my feed, my comments. Obviously, you can go on the list of all the things that they can now see. And the main point of that is, so not only do the people on the product side who write the user stories generally, they make sure that what they want is clearly defined. And then for the developers, that helps them identify why we're building it. Because if you just say, if you break it down to the nitty gritty and say, let's write a ticket to send a friend request, and that's it, you stop there. They can build that, but they may miss things, or they may build it wrong if they don't have the full context why they're doing it. Right.
Oh, okay.
That's why it's important.
Tell us one more time. I'm going to write it down. What are the 3 things? It was who is it for? Why are you doing it?
Yeah.
And
what are we doing? Yeah.
What are we doing?
So and then it's why. So our template that we use, we say as a blank. So as a blank, I want to blank so I can blank.
So I can. I love that. I feel like that is super useful for keeping everybody on target and everybody on the same, like, why are we doing this and what are we doing? So what would you say, like, if there was a company out there, or if I was a client looking at a software development company and they were talking about their user stories, like, what is a bad user story? Like you said, like the ticket that you send in that just says, I want a friend request.
Yeah. Like a bad user story would be, even if they do the role, maybe they give you some of the information. But yeah, a lot of the time, usually what we'll get is we'll say, if it's on a feature list before we get into a user story, or maybe sometimes we do get user stories where they're like, yeah, I do have user stories, but then we'll get stuff where it says, I want to be able to send a friend request so I can have friends, or so I can get friends.
Yeah.
And then that's it. And it's like, okay, well, that makes sense. And that doesn't, we get what you're trying to say, but it doesn't really understand, like, okay, well, what's the point of having friends? Like, why do we have friends on those apps? What does that do for us? That would be a bad one, where it's kind of getting the same idea across, but we don't understand the purpose of adding friends. We don't know how that expands on the application as a whole.
Yeah, you got to really get to that why. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we kind of have gone over that template of how you guys write your good user stories. And how do you feel like having a good agile user story, how do you feel like that really benefits the client?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the nice part for the client is that's the main point of them getting their point across, right? Is saying, this is the feature I want, and this is why we need it. And so if they can look at those user stories that either they've written or they've communicated to the project manager, we've written, it's a good way to kind of take inventory of, hey, we have these 5 user stories that cover these 5 main features that we want, and we're all on the same page of what those are and what they need to do and why they're doing it. That lets them identify, right, that we've got that in inventory. We know that that's what needs to be done. We're all on the same page of that. And they can quickly see that that's all in there and that's what we're building, without having to then go through all of the nitty gritty, all the finer details. They don't have to go through 100 tickets that we have to create in the development process to build those things. They kind of just look at those building blocks of saying, well, if you can get these 5 user stories done, and this is why we're doing it, and this is what they need to accomplish, then we know we're on the same page. We'll let you guys go over with the development team and talk about the 20 things we got to break down to make that one user story work. That's where we'll handle the finer details. And so it just keeps everybody on the same page, right? Making sure.
I really think when it comes to software development, between the client side and the development side, really a big portion of that is communication and knowing, like, making sure that if I was the client and I wanted you guys to develop something for me, I would want to make sure that, like, I'm heard and understood, and that you can pass that along to the developers and that everybody can be kind of on that same page. And it feels like user stories is a good way to kind of keep everybody on that same page together.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The thing is that we don't want the clients to try to, once they get in the headspace of trying to, right, it kind of goes either way. They can either be too distant or too involved.
Right.
And sometimes, right, if they feel the need to try to identify, how it needs to be designed exactly, how are we storing the data, or what does the UI look like exactly? That's not their specialty, right? A lot of our clients, they're building, they have their industry specialty. Maybe they're in healthcare, finance. They're not a UX designer, UI designer.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
yeah. So we let the specialists work on that part, and then we just make sure that we're building the core functionality that they need in accomplishing their business goals.
Awesome. Well, do you have any last tips on Agile user stories or just the Agile methodology in general? Any last like little tidbit of information that you want us to know?
Yeah, I would say Agile's the biggest things. It's kind of a game of balance.
Mhm.
It's kind of easy to dip into either side, where you over plan at the beginning, or then you kind of fall back into that like waterfall method where you try to plan everything up front,
Yeah.
which is good. And I think a lot of people want to go that way just because that's kind of what's taught to you your whole life. Like, hey, plan up front so that way you're prepared,
Yeah.
which is good. You want to have that, but then again, things change. It makes it to where we're not as agile.
Yeah.
We can make changes down the road. And then on the other side with agile, the other way that you can go is, well, let's not plan anything up front. Let's just get into it. We'll start going through that process. That's another thing to, be wary of. We still want basically like the skeleton of what we're going to build, right? We want to know, well, when does this thing need to be delivered? Does it matter if it comes out at a certain time? What's the main objective of what we're building? What are the milestones? Those types of things you want to start with. And then I would say the last thing with agile, I'd say the core piece of it is it's continuous. We never really take our foot off the gas in a sense.
Okay.
If the whole key of it is, you plan your sprint, you work for those 2 weeks, and then you get ready for your next planning meeting to get into the next sprint. But that means, the developers are going to be working, and at that time, the designer, the product manager, the product owner, all of those people have to be continuously working to have everything prepared for that next planning meeting. So everybody has to continuously flow. There's never, okay, I'll work on Monday, Tuesday, and then I'll be ready for that planning meeting in 2 weeks. It's a continuous effort of everyone being involved throughout the whole process.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate your time. And we just have one last question. It's probably the most important one. Are you ready? If you could have any superpower, what would it be?
Oof, that's a toughie. Probably go with the boring one that most people would say is probably fly. I think that would be pretty cool to be able to
Yeah,
fly. I think nice
Superman.
experience, and you can get places a lot faster too.
Yeah, I would like to fly. I could fly in comfort around the world, and I could go visit all my friends and just fly there. So I can see that one. It's a good one.
Avoid TSA. That'd be nice. Right?
Exactly. Us and Iron Man flying through the sky.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Colton,
Exactly.
I really appreciate your time. Thank you. Good luck. Keep doing what you do. You guys are doing a great job. We really appreciate you.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much, Ramsey.